welcome to this very special personal development web show on a subject that we all, if we're honest with ourselves, encounter almost daily, and that is not getting the results that we want, desire, and deserve. Well, it's today that your life can change. My special BV-TV Webshow guest is an acclaimed international author, thought leader, and filmmaker whose latest film has set a viewership record in its first 24 hours of release. How Thoughts Become Things is a new film by Douglas Vermeeren. Welcome, Douglas.
It's good to be with you, Malcolm.
This special web show is in 3 parts. In part 2, Douglas will talk about what holds you back. And in part 3, how to propel yourself forward. But first, let's get this right for you, because in part 1, you need to get to know the premise behind Douglas's thinking about thoughts and things. So, Douglas, please introduce us to the premise behind how thoughts become things and tease us with discovering the secret we'll discover in part 3 if we all watch parts 1 and 2 carefully. Douglas.
And I think carefully is such an amazing word to start with. Here's the interesting thing is we all have heard the idea that thoughts become things. And I think most of the time when we hear that phrase, we're often focused on thoughts and things. In other words, we hear about how do I think positive? How can I overcome my negative thinking and my self-doubts, even my fear and all of these challenges? So we really get hung up a lot on this idea that we need to think these powerful, pristine, and perfect thoughts in order to really manifest the reality that we desire. The other thing that a lot of people focus on is obviously the things, specifically material things in most cases, but not always. Sometimes we talk about the relationships that we want, or even the feelings of self-worth and connection that we want, the improvement in our health and our fitness. But again, then there's also that abundance. We want more time, we want more money, we want more material things, the ability to travel, the ability to drive the cars that we want, etc. But I think the important 2 parts that are missing are those 2 other words that we don't actually talk about a lot, and that's how. So we want to talk a little bit about the strategy behind, and the how is actually going to be quite surprising to you. But the most important word, if you look at the logo that Malcolm has on the screen and that I've got also back here, that word become is actually slightly smaller. And the reason why is because I believe it goes unnoticed, and this is really the hidden key. That idea of changing, becoming something new. I love what Jim Rohn once said. Jim Rohn once said that if a person wins the lottery and wants to keep it, they must learn how to become a millionaire very quickly. Bob Proctor in our film also talks about, and you've probably heard this in the film The Secret as well, that everything vibrates at a frequency. Yet, if we want to attract those things into our life, it's really important that we learn how to become in tune with those frequencies. So in other words, if we want to expand what we have, we must expand who we are. And when we can do that, all of a sudden, amazing and miraculous things begin to happen. But the important thing, if we go back to how for a minute, is to get some clarity around understanding what it is that we really want so that we can start to build those pieces. I kind of love what Stephen Covey said. Stephen Covey said, many people climb the ladder of success only to find that it's leaning against the wrong wall. So what can we do to make sure that we understand where we want to go before we start with the how we're going to get there?
Yeah, excellent. I must check which ladder I've got, leaning against which wall.
And it's never too late to change ladders, by the way.
That's too true, yeah. I do get dizzy at heights, mate. Thanks, Douglas. And just to remind you, you can purchase access to Douglas' brilliant film for a very low price at the URL behind me. But before Douglas reveals how you can move forward to success, I want to know from him in part 2, what are some of the commonly held beliefs that are preventing most of us from achieving the outcomes we want? So, Douglas, what holds us back, and how do we self-sabotage ourselves?
Well, that's a brilliant question. And in fact, there's 2 areas that I'd like to really spend time discussing. Naturally, there's more things that hold us back than just the 2, and I invite people to come see the film, which again, you can find at howthoughtsbecomethings.com primarily. But the 2 things that really hold us back, let's start with the first one, and that's that most of us believe that we come from a background of programming that has limited us. In other words, our family, our friends, our community, the education that we've gotten, the environment that we were raised in, that now because of where we were, we're destined to fail. In fact, it's not uncommon to hear people say, I was raised in a terrible dysfunctional family, and so therefore that's who I will be, right? I will become that way because of where I've been. The truth of the matter is, what most people forget is that your programming is actually ongoing. In fact, even today, even as you listen to this interview, you are being programmed. And one way I like to describe that is, you've heard the saying that says we become like the 5 people we surround ourselves with most. Now, I think the idea of 5 is important, but the other word that most people neglect is the word spend. Not spent, which is a past tense activity, but spend currently. We level up to the standards of those that we surround ourselves with. We level up to the things that we allow to influence us, whether it's the television, the social media, the radio, the TV, everything that we choose to receive our cues and our influences from, we allow to influence us. So that's item number 1. So that's one thing that really keeps us back, is the excuses and what we cling to as our influence. The second thing I think is really important that most people actually miss. You see, a lot of people, when it comes to pop psychology, are talking about the importance, like I said in the beginning, of having powerful, pristine, potent, and positive thinking all the time. The truth of the matter is that's not the way that thoughts arrive for humans. In fact, most of us get discouraged when we have a moment of self-doubt or a question of fear or something that enters in that's somewhat negative. But if we really understand how thoughts arrive, they arrive actually in a duality. There's a positive part of the thought and a negative part of the thought. In fact, for those of you in the audience, some of you are business owners or entrepreneurs. The way that it evolved is, in your mind came this really exciting idea of, yes, you can be a business owner. Yes, you can do it. The possibilities are there. This is what the future could look like. And just behind that was no, you can't. No, you're not good enough. You've never done this before. Your family and your background and your programming doesn't support you. And so what happens is that duality thought actually descends into that programming, that nest, if you will. And if you do have a support network, if you do have influences around you that are uplifting and positive, if you do have things in your life that have told you that you could, well, what happens is that positive side receives more power when it lands. But if you've got the opposite, naturally the negative receives more power. Now, here's the interesting thing is that we have discovered through scientific study that our environment is actually our biggest contributor to how we think. And just to kind of maybe share an example of how that is we've got to remember that the majority of our thinking is actually reactionary. It responds to a stimulus that we have. In fact, even in this video right now, if I were to say to you the word dog, immediately you're thinking of a dog. But up until now, you probably weren't. So it was me that drew that stimulus out. So how can you use this knowledge to your advantage? Well, if we can pre-plan, if we can decide, for example, if we know that the discussion of a dog is on the way, if we can decide ahead of time what the dog looks like, sounds like, feels like, when that dog gets mentioned, not only will we recognize, that's something I prepared for, but we can also take control of that to create the outcome that we want. So how do you apply this in real life? Again, if you're a business owner out there, I want you to start thinking about some of the things that you will encounter, some of the challenges or maybe even difficulties some of your customers will encounter. And I'd like you to pre-plan a little bit about how you're going to respond and how you're going to deal with it, and practice those responses so it somewhat becomes habitual before it shows up. And then when something externally triggers that response, you immediately can default to your prepared state. And I think that's a really important thing for us to do.
That's fascinating, because I must admit I've had, I think we call it cognitive dissonance, that doubt. Yeah. And
Yes.
many's a times. And sometimes I've surrounded myself with the wrong people who have said, oh yeah, you'll never do it. It won't work. It won't work.
Yeah.
With their own agenda.
Something, I'm so glad that you pointed that out too, because we often dismiss what we call toxic people. And as I went out and I interviewed 400 of the world's top achievers, what I found is a top achiever doesn't run from problems. They actually embrace them and they solve them. And so while I advocate the idea of running away from abusive people, toxic is different. And there's really generally 2 kinds of toxic people. One is the complainer. And, they don't really have a solution, but the weather's not good. The football team's not serving me. Whatever it is, they'll complain. And to tell you the truth, if you don't have clarity on what you want in advance, generally it's pretty easy to get swept up into that. So that's not their problem. That's your problem, that you didn't build the clarity around who you are and what you really want. But the second kind of toxic person, or person that generally gets labeled as toxic, is a critic. Someone who does come to the table and they'll say negative things, but oftentimes they present ideas, facts, solutions. They tell you how you can improve. And the truth of the matter is sometimes a critical person does have value. They have things that they will say that actually can help you or prevent pain or challenge or loss or even losing money or customers, right? But the problem with most of us is we have such a big enough ego that we're not prepared to hear it, right? And the critic, their only real downfall is not that they're wrong, because sometimes they're not. It's just that they're not always a great communicator.
Yeah.
And so if we can understand where that person is coming from, and I'm not saying even we always will take an advice from a critic, but the person who immediately cuts off these critics or these toxic people is actually discarding a very valuable tool that will help them get to success. What do they say? The most valuable part of any business is its customer service department. We can only fix the things that we're aware of. And sometimes it's not very comfortable to hear the things that we're doing incorrectly. So we've got to be aware of that.
It is sometimes hard, though, to put yourself into the other person's shoes, isn't it? And see it from their perspective.
It's incredibly difficult to do that. And even aside from putting ourselves in the other person's point of view, I remember, going back as a teenager, if we look at my mother, she would say certain things, don't hang out with those kids. Truth is my ego felt bruised. And so therefore I didn't even want to hear the message. Right. So it wasn't even so much that I had to put myself in my mother's shoes. Like, she was just right. That was the plain and simple of it. But because of sort of my ego, and I thought I was smarter, and I thought, even if those kids get into trouble, I'll have the willpower and the strength to step away. We all know that never works. Yeah. And so I think it's important to really understand that, again, if we're looking to gain success, there's a difference between tenacity and stupidity. What's the difference? A tenacious person will try and learn and listen. They'll be curious. They'll take advice. They'll take insights from other people. A stupid person will try and do it by themselves. They'll try and solve all the problems without anyone else's input. And naturally, in the end, we can only exceed and excel as high as our own experience and knowledge if we're doing it by ourselves. In fact, that's why I really dislike that idea that says, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. No, it's not. If you look at all major accomplishments through the history of the world, Sir Edmund Hillary, when he climbed Mount Everest, he had a team with him. Neil Armstrong, when he landed on the moon, there were people in Houston guiding the astronaut. There were other people in the capsule with him. He didn't build the thing in his garage, right? So we have to understand that if we're going to accomplish big things, it's always going to be through teamwork. It's always going to be through support.
Okay, so I'm going to take that really on board there and park that film by Doris Day, Que Sera Sera. It's out.
Well, and that's just it too. And I think one of the things we address in the film, which is kind of important, is to recognize the difference between deliberate creation and autopilot. And I think a lot of people are content to be on autopilot, and what will come will come. And it's even that idea, you hear so many people even say, I'm going to take massive action and let's see what happens. That's not the way to create success. The way to create success is actually to take deliberate action. Yeah. Right. I don't want anybody to become a hustler. I don't want you to get up at 5 a.m. I don't want you to do all these things unless you have a plan. Right. You need the plan first. You need to know what you're doing.
I've got you. Okay. Now, I hope all my viewers didn't cheat and fast forwarded to part 3, because parts 1 and 2 clearly lay the foundations of your future success. So in part 3, I'm asking Douglas to reveal to you what you will gain from purchasing his film and what can propel us all forward and fast. Over to you, Douglas. Let's move them forward.
Wow. Well, I think that the biggest thing is we've got some really incredible thought leaders sharing the greatest advice on how you can control your thoughts and become different. Just to share some of the names, we've got Bob Proctor, Joe Vitale, John DeMartini, John Ossoff, Marie Diamond, Bob Doyle, Dennis Waitley, and others. But having said that, who's the most important person in this film? You. Obviously you. And this is really the mission of the film, is to help you for the very first time learn how to manifest things into reality in a way that you've never seen before. There's some things shared in this film that have never been discussed. And some of them we've kind of touched on a little bit here today, but how do you overcome fear? How do you beat the excuses that are holding you back? How do you stay focused with the things that really matter? How do you discover your highest values and your highest purpose? One of the things that I also love about this film that's different than any other project that I've ever been involved in is when you purchase the film, you actually get a workbook that takes you through step by step on how to implement it. So it's not just an experience of watching the movie, it's a real world participation implementational exercise. Now, the other thing too is also when you get in the movie, it's not a rental, it's something that you get to keep forever. And what I've seen from people is that many of them, just like with films like The Secret, they've watched it again and again, and they've got something new out of it each time. So what will you get out of the film? A great way to answer that is, what do you bring when you arrive? Because the truth of the matter is we'll meet you where you start, and we'll help you to become what you need to become to manifest the things that you really want. So what will you get out of the film? Again, I call it the 5 pillar areas. You're going to find greater self, connection to self, self-worth, self-confidence, self-fulfillment. You're going to find also connection to the spiritual nature of you, which you can define that. I personally believe that it has a lot to do with how we ethically operate among the communities that we live based on what we believe and the greater good that we can create. You're also going to learn about your health, how to improve that. If that's something that you desire to lose weight, quit smoking, become more fit, eat better, you're going to find ways that will inspire you to do that. Your relationships will also improve, not just with your significant other, but with everyone, including your community, your business relationships, and whatever it is you're trying to grow in that regard. And then lastly, which I think is probably the most important, is abundance. My definition of becoming wealthy is different than anyone else's, maybe that you've heard. Yes, I want you to realize a specific amount of money. Yes, I want you to get to a high level of financial return, but it doesn't do you any good unless you also get the time that comes with it. So you need to have that abundance of time and opportunity to also enjoy what you have. In fact, Money Magazine recently rated me as the #1 passive income coach in the world. I'm doing more than 14 figures, or $14 million, more than 10 figures per year, and I don't have a job. So we practice what we preach, right? You must have your time. You must have your time as well. So if any of these things are appealing to you, or they've struck a chord, or there's something that you want to attain or grow, or there are things that you want to have more of in your life, abundance in all those areas, the film will show you how you can take the thought processes of that and then engineer it into a real reality that's easy for you to maintain, that it's not something difficult for you to do, that it literally becomes your habitual lifestyle, your ritual tendencies, the things that you gravitate to, and you will see an up level of your life. It's a powerful film.
Brilliant. Douglas, I've thoroughly enjoyed meeting you, and I also really enjoyed the private viewing I had of your brilliant film. So before you leave me, can you give me, my viewers, a final 3 top tips on how to make the film work for themselves and work fast?
Well, I think one of the first tips that's really important is just remember that the return on nothing is always nothing. So you need to get out and not only see it, but do something with it. One of the things that I talk a little bit about in the film is, you've heard of affirmations. I think affirmations are wonderful and they do change your life, but I'm going to encourage you to add to that, and add to that something which I call affirmations. So in addition to just talking the talk, let's show you how to get out there and walk the walk, which you have to be it before you can do it, before you can have it. But when we can expand who we really are at the beginning, who we become, we can expand what we'll have ultimately in the end. So that's probably number 1. Number 2 is, I'm going to suggest you watch it with a friend. In fact, if you assemble a group of 25 or more people that will watch it, one of our speakers will actually join you for a private Q&A. So it's a really good opportunity. Not only does it make you the hero for assembling friends and getting one of our speakers there, but I think it's a really great opportunity to continue the journey into the implementation. Because let's face it, whenever we participate either in a book or a film, sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect on how we can apply this in our day-to-day immediate life, right? So I think that that's really important. And I think probably the third thing, which is maybe for me, one of the areas that I think a lot of people miss when it comes to how thoughts become things. Yes, we talked about clarity, and a goal that is specific and clear becomes attainable and near. So when you see with clarity who you are and what you want, life gets easier. But I know that that's sometimes a second step for most people, not the first. Some people are like, how do I get clarity? What do I even want? Like, what do I value? Like, where do I fit, right? Like, how do I find this? So I'm going to suggest one big thing that I think is important. Don't strive to exit your comfort zone and get outside of your comfort zone. start first by finding your brilliant zone. What are the things that are really lighting you up, the things that fire you up? Think carefully about that. And not just your passion and purpose, but where does your passion and purpose overlap the passion and purpose of other people? Because as you find that connection with others, that overlap that's there, you're going to find also a sense of validation. And this idea of connecting with other people is, in fact, probably our greatest power and our greatest joy, and also our greatest, how should we say, tool to manifest. The more connected we are with others that can help us and that see our vision, that can influence us and lift us higher, the easier it will really be for you in the end.
Brilliant. In this special BV-TV web show, I've been talking to Douglas Vermeeren, the maker of the dynamic film How Thoughts Become Things. Get it at the URL behind me or howthoughtsbecomethings.com. Thank you, Douglas, for being such an inspiring guest.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun.